The July sun beat down relentlessly on Whispering Pines Lake, its fierce glare transforming the water's surface into a blinding sheet of hammered gold foil that shimmered and danced. Laughter, bright and carefree, spilled from the small, crescent-shaped man-made beach, where families sought refuge from the oppressive heat, splashing and squealing in the surprisingly warm shallows. Further out, the community pier, a long, weathered structure of sun-bleached wood extending into the deeper, cooler water, buzzed with the cheerful, kinetic energy of high summer. Children cannonballed off the end with exuberant shouts that echoed across the water, their splashes momentarily disrupting the glassy surface. Teenagers sprawled languidly on towels, absorbing the sun's potent rays, while a handful of dedicated anglers patiently cast lines from the sturdy planks, lost in their quiet pursuit. Near the pier's terminus, where the water deepened significantly, 10-year-old Emma Carter stood utterly mesmerized, seemingly rooted to the spot, absorbed in her own world. The way the intense sunlight fractured and scattered on the moving water, creating fleeting rainbows and blinding flashes. The hypnotic, rhythmic cadence of the lake lapping gently against the thick, algae-slicked pilings below. The quicksilver, darting shadows of unseen fish navigating the murky green depths. It all converged within her small frame, creating an overwhelming symphony of sensation, a buzzing, vibrant internal excitement that simply demanded physical expression. Her hands began to move, fluttering near her face in intricate, rapid, yet graceful patterns. Her small body seemed to hum with an almost imperceptible energy, a physical manifestation of the pure, unadulterated sensory joy flooding her system. Emma was autistic. This harmless, involuntary, self-regulating behavior, stimming, was as innate and necessary to her physiology as breathing, as blinking. It was her brain's natural way of processing the intense beauty and sometimes overwhelming energy of the world around her, a visible echo of her internal state. Her mother, Sarah Carter, observed her from a shaded bench positioned midway down the pier structure, a soft, knowing, slightly bittersweet smile gracing her lips. She recognized that particular look of focused, innocent delight on Emma's face, the deep absorption that signaled true contentment, a state sometimes elusive for her daughter. Yet, alongside the maternal warmth, she maintained a quiet, constant vigilance, an undercurrent of awareness honed by years of experience. She knew, all too well, that Emma's beautiful, unique, harmless expressions of joy were often misunderstood, misinterpreted, sometimes even actively feared, in a world that frequently prized quiet, predictable conformity above all else. That very ideal of rigid conformity seemed physically embodied by Beverly Carmichael, who was, at that precise moment, marching purposefully down the length of the pier, a sturdy clipboard clutched like a weapon against her chest, an expression of profound, undisguised irritation tightening the corners of her mouth. Beverly, a long-serving and vocal HOA board member, currently wielding power as the self-appointed chair of the Vital Lake Beautification Committee, viewed the waterfront amenities, the beach, the pier, the surrounding landscaping, not primarily as spaces for community recreation and shared enjoyment, but rather as critical extensions of her own meticulously controlled personal domain. Anything, or, more accurately, anyone, deviating from the established norm, anything disrupting her narrow, rigidly defined parameters of acceptable public behavior, immediately became a target for swift, decisive correction. Her sharp, critical eyes, scanning the pier like a hawk searching for imperfections, quickly fixed upon Emma's rapidly moving hands. Ignoring Sarah completely, as if she were merely part of the background scenery, Beverly strode directly towards where Emma stood near the pier's edge, lost in her peaceful, sun-drenched, watery world. "Young lady," Beverly snapped, her voice sharp, grating, and unnecessarily loud, cutting through the pleasant ambient sounds of summer fun like shattering glass. The sudden noise made several nearby children flinch. "Stop that flapping right now." Immediately, Beverly commanded, planting her feet firmly a few yards from Emma. It's highly inappropriate behavior for a public space, and frankly, it's disturbing the other residents. Emma, startled violently by the sudden, harsh intrusion into her focused sensory bubble, didn't seem to register the command's meaning instantly. Or perhaps the abrupt, jarring shift from peaceful absorption to aggressive, negative confrontation was simply too much for her nervous system to process coherently in that moment. Her hands continued their intricate dance, perhaps even quickening slightly, a reflexive response to the unexpected, unpleasant stimulus. Sarah was on her feet in a heartbeat, moving swiftly and smoothly to intercept Beverly before she could advance any closer to her vulnerable daughter. "Excuse me, Mrs. Carmichael," Sarah said, consciously modulating her voice, keeping it calm, level, yet infusing it with an unmistakable undertone of firm, unwavering resolve. "Please do not speak to my daughter in that tone. Her name is Emma." She subtly positioned herself slightly between the older woman and her child, creating a protective buffer. "Emma is autistic," she explained patiently, though her heart was beginning to pound with a familiar mix of anxiety and anger. Flapping her hands is simply how she expresses herself and regulates her system when she's feeling happy or excited, or processing strong sensory input like the light on the water. She's not bothering anyone, and she is certainly not hurting anything or anyone. Beverly turned her steely, intolerant gaze fully on Sarah now, her thin lips curling downward in undisguised disdain. The challenge to her perceived authority was clearly unwelcome. "Autistic," the word dripped with skepticism and judgment, as if it were a fabricated excuse rather than a clinical diagnosis. That is absolutely no excuse for bizarre, uncontrolled behavior in a shared community space. This is a neighborhood amenity, Mrs. Carter, funded by homeowner dues, not some private therapy session conducted in public view. Her voice grew colder, laced with condescension. That agitated weirdness. She gestured vaguely, dismissively towards Emma, who was now looking back and forth between the two women with growing confusion. "Makes normal people, paying residents, uncomfortable. It lowers the tone of our beautiful lakefront. It's simply not acceptable. If you cannot control her strange actions," she emphasized the word cruelly, "then you need to remove her from this pier. Immediately." "She doesn't need controlling," Sarah countered, her voice remaining steady but her protective instincts surging, a familiar fierce heat rising in her chest. She would not back down. "She needs understanding. She needs acceptance. And she has every single right to be here, on this dock, enjoying this beautiful lake, just like everyone else enjoying their Saturday." The escalating confrontation, the raised voices, the palpable tension radiating from the three figures, began to draw more direct attention. Nearby families paused their conversations, casting uneasy, sideways glances. Some parents subtly gathered their children closer, sensing the potential for unpleasantness. Others watched with open, wary curiosity, the carefree atmosphere evaporating around them. Beverly, incensed at being contradicted so directly, so publicly, felt an angry flush creep up her neck and stain her cheeks. Her eyes, narrowed into hostile slits, darted back towards Emma. The little girl, acutely sensitive to the shifting emotional frequencies, undoubtedly picking up on the waves of anger emanating from Beverly and the protective tension radiating from her mother, had started flapping her hands even faster now, more erratically. The initial joyful stimming had morphed visibly into an anxious response, confusion and fear clouding her young face. Beverly declared, puffing herself up with exaggerated self-importance, tapping her clipboard for emphasis. "Am on the Homeowners Association board. I am an elected official in this community. I am responsible for maintaining standards, decorum, order. And I am telling you," she jabbed a finger towards Sarah, then shifted her glare back to Emma. "This behavior is unacceptable. It is disruptive." She took another aggressive step forward, deliberately closing the remaining distance, invading Emma's personal space, looming over the now visibly distressed child in a threatening manner. "Stop it," she commanded again, her voice rising, becoming shrill, losing its earlier semblance of control. "Stop that weird, jerky flapping this instant. You hear me?" Emma flinched back instinctively from the proximity and the volume, her eyes wide with confusion and escalating fear. The sudden, loud, aggressive, close-up attention was clearly overwhelming her sensory system, pushing her towards overload. She let out a small, involuntary, distressed whimper, a sound of pure neurological distress, and stumbled slightly backward on the uneven planking, her heel catching near the raised edge of the pier. In that split second, something brittle, ugly, and long-simmering seemed to snap deep inside Beverly Carmichael's rigidly controlled psyche. Fueled by a toxic, volatile combination of righteous indignation, wounded pride, perceived authority being flouted, and a profound, chilling lack of basic human empathy, she acted on pure, unthinking, malicious impulse. "I told you to stop," she shrieked, her face contorted into a terrifying mask of unrestrained rage. And with a violent, shocking, two-handed shove delivered with surprising force squarely to Emma's small, unsuspecting back, she propelled the child forward, completely off balance, sending her tumbling helplessly over the edge of the high pier structure. "You weird little thing." Beverly spat the words down into the space where Emma had been, her voice laced with venom, as 10-year-old Emma Carter vanished from sight with a startled cry that was abruptly cut off by a heavy splash in the deep, murky green lake water several feet below. "Emma!" Sarah screamed, a sound of pure, primal terror ripped from the depths of her soul, a sound that shattered the summer afternoon stillness and echoed horribly across the suddenly silent lake. She scrambled desperately, blindly towards the edge, her mind instantly consumed by a horrifying, paralyzing kaleidoscope of worst-case scenarios. Emma was a decent swimmer, yes, but only in the controlled, predictable environment of a clear swimming pool supervised closely. The shock of the unexpected fall, the disorienting cold of the deeper water, the panic, the unknown depth, potential unseen obstacles. She kicked off her sandals frantically, poised to jump in herself, her heart pounding against her ribs like a frantic drumbeat. Suddenly, the very air around them began to vibrate intensely, then throbbed with a powerful, rapidly approaching, rhythmic whump whump whump. Heads snapped upwards almost as one, eyes squinting against the blinding sun. Roaring into view seemingly out of nowhere, descending rapidly as if summoned by Sarah's scream, a U.S. Coast Guard MH-60 Jayhawk helicopter filled the sky above the lake, its distinctive orange and white rescue markings stark and unmistakable against the brilliant azure canvas. It wasn't just passing over on a routine flight. It was vectoring with obvious, urgent intent, directly towards the community pier, its altitude dropping with alarming speed. Inside the vibrating cockpit and noise-filled cabin of the Jayhawk, Lieutenant Commander Ben Carter, Emma's father, felt his blood turn to ice water, a cold dread gripping his chest tighter than any G-force. He and his experienced crew were returning from a demanding, multi-hour search and rescue (SAR) training exercise conducted over the Atlantic coast, finishing up just a few miles east of their current position. Their standard flight path back to the air station frequently took them near the Whispering Pines residential area. Ben, knowing Sarah and Emma planned a lake day, had intentionally requested a minor route deviation from the pilot, just a slight dogleg inland, hoping for a quick, morale-boosting glimpse of his wife and daughter enjoying the promised afternoon sunshine. He'd spotted them easily, Sarah on the familiar bench, Emma's bright pink swimsuit unmistakable near the end of the pier, just moments before the situation turned ugly. Then his trained eyes, accustomed to observing details from altitude, registered the unfolding confrontation, the aggressive posture of the woman confronting them, Beverly Carmichael, a face and demeanor he unfortunately recognized from previous, deeply unpleasant HOA committee meetings where her inflexibility was legendary. And then the absolutely unthinkable, unbelievable horror, the sudden, violent movement, the unmistakable shove, and his precious daughter, his Emma, vanishing over the side into the dark water. Pilot, mark position, witness hostile action, civilian on civilian, pier structure below. Subject pushed my daughter, repeat, my daughter, into the water. Vicinity of the community landing. Take us down. I need minimum safe hover altitude directly over the point of entry. Prepare for immediate SAR swimmer deployment. This is not a drill. Ben's voice, usually the epitome of calm, measured command crackling over the internal communications system, was tight, strained, vibrating with barely contained fury and the adrenaline surge of immediate crisis. He was already snapping his flight helmet securely shut, Instinctively checking the vital neck and wrist seals on the dry suit he wore habitually under his flight gear during any overwater operations, a precaution that now felt chillingly prescient. Years of intense rescue diver training kicked into high gear, the practiced, automatic movements forming a thin, precarious barrier against the overwhelming wave of raw, paternal panic threatening to engulf his professional composure. The powerful Jayhawk banked sharply, its twin-turbine engines screaming in protest, the immense downdraft from its heavy rotor blades churning the lake's surface below into a chaotic, boiling frenzy of spray and waves as the skilled pilot expertly established a low, stable hover, perhaps holding steady at 20, maybe 25 feet above the churning water where Emma had disappeared from view. People remaining on the pier instinctively ducked lower, shielding their eyes and faces from the stinging spray and the sudden, disorienting prop wash, their shouts rendered unintelligible by the deafening roar of the turbines directly overhead. Sarah, half sobbing, half screaming, was pointing frantically, desperately towards the spot in the turbulent water where she'd last seen Emma's head break the surface for a terrifyingly brief second. Ben didn't waste a precious second waiting for the mechanical rescue hoist to be deployed from the cabin above. Emergency protocols allowed for direct swimmer deployment in critical, time-sensitive situations where immediate action could mean the difference between life and death. This qualified unequivocally. He moved swiftly, purposefully to the open cabin door, the powerful wind generated by the rotors tearing at his flight suit. He took one deep, centering breath, visually locking onto his optimal entry point just beyond the most violent ring of turbulence created by the downwash, mentally factoring in the slight sideways drift of the aircraft in the light breeze. Then, with the practiced economy of motion born of endless drills, he launched himself out and down in a controlled, near-vertical jump, hitting the churning water feet first, plunging deep beneath the turbulent surface into the sudden, cool, green, disorienting silence of the lake. He surfaced instantly, gasping, shaking his head to clear his vision through the helmet visor, his training ruthlessly suppressing the personal terror, forcing focus. His eyes scanned the immediate area rapidly. He spotted a flash of bright pink, Emma's favorite swimsuit, struggling weakly, clearly disoriented and panicked, just a few yards away, drifting slightly with the current generated by the helicopter. 3 powerful, adrenaline-fueled strokes, closing the distance in seconds, and he reached her side. His gloved hand closed securely around her upper arm, pulling her sputtering, coughing form towards his chest, decisively lifting her head and airway clear of the water. She was coughing violently, spitting out lake water, gasping desperately for air, her eyes wide with sheer terror, but blessedly, miraculously conscious. "Got you, sweetie. Daddy's got you. It's okay. Breathe," he yelled, his voice muffled by the helmet, but loud and clear enough for her to hear over the helicopter's unrelenting roar. He shifted into a strong side stroke, cradling her securely against him, towing her the short distance towards the pier where several pairs of helpful hands were already reaching down eagerly. With a surge of effort fueled by adrenaline and relief, he lifted Emma's slight, shivering frame upwards into the strong, waiting arms of Tom Henderson, the retired firefighter from next door, who carefully helped pull her fully onto the relative safety of the wooden dock planks. Sarah was there instantly, enveloping her daughter in a fierce, protective embrace, frantically checking her breathing, her airway, murmuring frantic reassurances and endearments in her ear, already stripping off the child's soaked shirt. Paramedics, alerted by a flood of multiple, simultaneous, frantic 911 calls from witnesses on the pier and the nearby shore reporting a child pushed into the lake, were just arriving on scene, their sirens audible even over the lingering sound waves from the helicopter. They jogged quickly down the wooden structure with their primary response bags and portable oxygen cylinder, reaching Emma's side within seconds of her being pulled from the water. Ben Carter, expelling lake water from his own airway with a cough, hauled his own heavy, waterlogged body up onto the pier structure. Water streamed from his specialized flight suit. He made a quick, professional assessment of Emma, saw the paramedics competently taking charge, initiating their protocols, checking vital signs, noted her shivering but responsive state. Then his gaze, now hard as glacial ice, swept the crowded dock until it found Beverly Carmichael. She stood frozen, a statue carved from disbelief and dawning horror, surrounded by a growing, tight circle of neighbors who were no longer silent, passive observers. They were openly yelling at her now, pointing accusatorily, their voices sharp and trembling with outrage, actively recounting what they had just witnessed to the newly arrived deputies. She pushed her. I saw the whole thing. She shoved that little girl right in the back. Deliberately. There was no accident about it. Pure malice. Crazy woman. What is wrong with you? She could have killed her. Ben activated the secure radio integrated into his flight helmet system, establishing a direct patch through to the Coast Guard Sector Command Watchstander and simultaneously requesting immediate, urgent liaison with the local county sheriff's dispatch center supervisor. Coast Guard Helicopter 6045 reporting on scene. Whispering Pines Lake Recreational Area Community Pier. Reporting deliberate assault witnessed directly by aircraft commander prior to rescue swimmer deployment. Assault resulted in victim, a minor, entering deep water. His voice was pure military professionalism again, clipped, precise, devoid of emotion, but underlined with a chilling, controlled fury that resonated even through the radio distortion. Civilian female suspect, positively identified by multiple witnesses on scene as Beverly Carmichael, intentionally and forcefully pushed the child, identified as my dependent daughter, into deep water from the pier structure. Victim recovered by CG rescue swimmer, conscious at this time, currently receiving EMS assessment for secondary drowning risk and potential physical injuries. He paused briefly, then continued relaying essential details for the responding ground units. Request immediate county sheriff response priority 1 to my current location for suspect detention and initiation of felony criminal investigation. Suspect poses potential flight risk and demonstrated clear danger to others based on witnessed actions. Multiple credible witnesses on scene providing statements to deputies now arriving. Within minutes, punctuated by the receding roar of the Jayhawk as it finally climbed away, its immediate rescue mission complete, having confirmed the victim was secure and receiving appropriate medical care, the sound of multiple approaching sirens grew louder, converging on the scene. County sheriff's deputies arrived in force, their cruisers pulling up near the dock entrance, lights painting the scene in flashing red and blue. The deputies moved efficiently, calmly taking control of the highly charged, emotional scene. They began methodically separating key witnesses, taking detailed initial statements, their expressions grim as the consistent narrative unfolded. The accounts were remarkably similar, vehement, and damningly precise. Everyone who had a clear view described a deliberate, forceful, two-handed shove preceded by a loud argument. Beverly Carmichael, confronted with a sea of accusing faces, the detailed, professional testimony of a uniformed Coast Guard lieutenant commander who had literally just fished his own daughter from the water directly following her actions, and her own sputtering, increasingly incoherent, contradictory denials. She shouldn't have been flapping like that. It was distracting. It was an accident. She startled me. The helicopter noise confused everything. Found herself utterly cornered, stripped of her bluster. A deputy carefully, formally read Beverly her Miranda rights from a small laminated card. Pale now, and visibly trembling, whether from dawning fear or residual rage, she was placed under arrest. The initial felony charges cited by the deputies on scene were gravely serious. Aggravated assault on a child, and felony reckless endangerment, with the lead detective explicitly noting the potential for upgraded charges, possibly including attempted murder, pending a full investigation into her precise intent, the known risks associated with pushing a child into deep water, and Emma's specific vulnerabilities. As Beverly Carmichael, suddenly looking frail and diminished, was led away in handcuffs towards a waiting patrol car, still protesting her innocence in a high-pitched whine, muttering about disrespect and bizarre behavior and community standards, a profoundly shaken Sarah held Emma tightly, cocooned in thick, warm emergency blankets provided by the paramedics. Emma was quiet now, unnervingly still, shivering violently despite the heat, clinging fiercely to her mother, her eyes wide and unfocused, seemingly looking through the people and the familiar surroundings, her small face pale with shock. The near tragedy sent immediate, ugly shockwaves rippling through the normally placid, tight-knit Whispering Pines lakeside community. The incident threw a harsh, unavoidable spotlight not just on Beverly Carmichael's shocking lack of impulse control and blatant prejudice, but forcefully illuminated the often invisible vulnerability of neurodivergent individuals and the potentially lethal consequences of intolerance, ignorance, and unchecked anger. In the emotionally charged days and weeks that followed, as the complex criminal case against Beverly Carmichael proceeded methodically through the justice system, the Whispering Pines HOA board found itself navigating a firestorm of resident outrage, negative regional media attention, and potential legal liability. Under immense pressure, they quickly commissioned a full, independent safety review of the entire lakefront area, the beach, the swimming zones, the pier structure itself, and all associated common facilities. Lieutenant Commander Ben Carter, drawing on his extensive professional background in maritime safety, water rescue operations, and hazard assessment, attended the emergency HOA meeting convened to address the crisis. He formally recommended, in addition to the standard surface-level inspections, a thorough, professional underwater survey in the immediate vicinity of the community pier. He cited the notoriously murky water conditions, the age of the wooden structure, and the critical need to identify and mitigate any potential unseen hazards lurking below the surface that could have exacerbated the danger to Emma or posed a risk to any other swimmer or boater. "We need absolute certainty about what's down there," he stated grimly, his voice carrying the weight of authority and personal investment. "Accidents happen, debris accumulates, but given the circumstances, we need to rule out any contributing factors definitively." The HOA board, visibly chastened and eager to demonstrate proactive safety measures and regain community trust, readily agreed to his expert recommendation. They hired a reputable professional dive team specializing in underwater structural inspections, hazard identification, and recovery operations. What the dive team discovered during their meticulous, grid-pattern search of the lakebed around and directly underneath the community pier shocked everyone involved, instantly transforming a horrific case of assault into something far more sinister, calculated, and complex. Just beneath the surface, effectively hidden from view by the lake's perpetually murky water, concentrated primarily in the officially designated swimming area most frequented by families and children near the pier, they found a treacherous, hidden tangle of deliberately placed, hazardous debris. Heavy, rusted industrial-grade chains were discovered wrapped securely around discarded engine blocks and jagged concrete cinder blocks, anchoring them firmly, immovably to the Silta Lake bottom. Jagged shards of scrap sheet metal, some with dangerously sharp edges exposed, and sections of corroded, sharp-edged metal pipes were found partially buried in the silt or intentionally snagged on submerged logs and pier supports, creating hidden laceration and impalement hazards. Several old automobile tires, weighted down internally with rocks and concrete fragments, formed unseen, solid obstacles directly within the primary swimming zone. This wasn't the random result of casual, accidental dumping accumulated over many years. The dive team's detailed report, accompanied by disturbing underwater video footage, unequivocally concluded the debris field showed clear, undeniable signs of deliberate placement, strategic positioning, and secure anchoring. It was, in effect, a crudely constructed, hidden, malicious underwater obstacle course. It seemed clearly, unambiguously designed with the intent to injure swimmers, snag fishing lines causing entanglement, or at the very least, make swimming in that specific, popular family area deeply unpleasant and potentially hazardous. Initial speculation swirled wildly through the stunned community as news of the discovery spread. Could it be the work of disgruntled teenagers, known for occasional minor vandalism around the lake? Or perhaps illegal dumping from nearby construction sites, contractors trying to avoid costly landfill disposal fees? The HOA board, desperate for a less horrifying explanation, even briefly entertained the unlikely theory of disgruntled former residents seeking some bizarre form of petty revenge against the community. These theories provided a temporary, albeit disturbing, buffer against the darker possibility. The discovery, however, inevitably added a chilling, ominous new dimension to the ongoing criminal investigation into Beverly Carmichael. Detectives immediately cross-referenced the estimated timeline of the debris placement with Beverly's known activities and complaints. They meticulously reviewed years of archived HOA meeting minutes and formal complaint logs, finding Beverly's numerous, vehement, and almost obsessive long-standing complaints about noisy children, splashing, unruly behavior, and perceived misuse of the lake facilities, specifically and repeatedly concentrated around the designated swimming area near the community pier. Then came the crucial breakthrough, born from persistent police work. Acting on a growing, uneasy hunch, investigators began methodically checking sales records at local hardware stores, building supply outlets, and even scrap metal dealers within a 20-mile radius. After weeks of painstaking effort, they found them. Receipts documenting Beverly Carmichael purchasing significant lengths of heavy-gauge industrial chain, specific types of anchoring hardware, heavy-duty steel cable ties, and other related items just months prior to Emma's assault. Purchases utterly inconsistent with any known home maintenance or gardening projects she had undertaken during that period. The final, damning piece fell irrevocably into place when investigators managed to track down a disgruntled former handyman who had performed occasional odd jobs for several HOA board members, including Beverly, the previous year. Under careful, persistent questioning, and eventually offered potential immunity from prosecution for minor, unrelated regulatory infractions related to his unlicensed work, he reluctantly, nervously admitted the truth. Beverly Carmichael had paid him a substantial amount of cash, entirely off the books, several months ago. His specific task? To help her dispose of some heavy junk, old engine parts, broken concrete, scrap metal she claimed was from a demolished shed in the lake, specifically near the community pier. He was instructed to do it late one evening, after dark, to avoid observation. She had told him, he claimed nervously, fidgeting under the detective's intense scrutiny, that she simply wanted to discourage unsafe swimming and diving right off the end of the pier by making the bottom less appealing and more natural. He swore he hadn't fully realized the true nature or the sheer dangerous extent of the junk, nor its malicious, hazardous configuration beneath the water. He just took the cash and dumped it where she directed. The combined evidence, her documented history of targeted hostility towards users of that specific area, the suspicious purchases matching the debris found, the handyman's corroborated testimony, painted an undeniable, horrifying picture. Beverly hadn't just snapped in a single moment of prejudiced rage and pushed Emma. She had engaged in a premeditated, calculated, dangerous, and potentially lethal scheme to weaponize the lake itself against the very community members, especially the children whose joyful noise offended her sensibilities, she despised. She had intentionally, methodically created a hidden death trap, putting potentially dozens of unsuspecting lives at severe risk over a prolonged period. Emma's fall into that specific, hazard-filled area was, in a terrifying way, horrifyingly coincidental with Beverly's underlying, calculated, hidden malice. The subsequent trial of Beverly Carmichael became a significant local and regional focal point, sparking intense, often uncomfortable discussions about disability rights, bystander responsibility, community safety, hidden prejudice festering beneath placid suburban surfaces, and the accountability of HOA governance structures. The prosecution meticulously, powerfully presented the chilling eyewitness accounts of the shove, the compelling expert testimony explaining autism, stemming behaviors, and the heightened vulnerability of neurodivergent children to trauma. They presented Lieutenant Commander Ben Carter's dramatic, professional rescue testimony, which left the courtroom utterly silent, gripping spectators and jurors alike. And finally, they unveiled the shocking, irrefutable physical and testimonial evidence of the deliberately created underwater debris field, directly linked to Beverly through her own purchase records and the reluctant but credible testimony of the handyman. Her defense team, attempting desperately to portray the shove as an accidental stumble triggered by mutual panic, or perhaps a grossly negligent but unintentional reaction, crumbled completely under the sheer weight of the consistent witness statements and Beverly's own documented history of targeted animosity and deceitful actions. The separate, damning revelation of the deliberately placed underwater hazards utterly destroyed any remaining shred of credibility or potential sympathy she might have hoped to garner from the jury. Beverly Carmichael was found guilty on all counts by the jury after only a few hours of deliberation. Felony aggravated assault on a child, significantly enhanced due to the victim's documented vulnerability and the hate bias motivation. Multiple counts of felony reckless endangerment related to the immediate act of shoving Emma, and numerous additional felony counts related to the illegal dumping of hazardous materials, creating a dangerous public nuisance, and recklessly endangering the entire community through the calculated creation of the underwater debris field. At the sentencing hearing, the presiding judge delivered a scathing, blistering denunciation from the bench, calling Beverly's actions in shoving Emma monstrous, cruel, utterly inexcusable, and clearly fueled by a repulsive prejudice against a vulnerable child. He then turned his attention pointedly to the evidence regarding the underwater debris, stating forcefully that it demonstrated a chillingly calculated malice, a profound and ongoing disregard for human life and public safety, particularly that of innocent children simply enjoying a community resource. Noting her complete lack of genuine remorse throughout the proceedings and emphasizing the distinct, dual nature of her criminal offenses, the immediate, violent assault on Emma, and the separate, premeditated, long-term environmental crime endangering scores of others, he sentenced her to the maximum allowable term under state law for the aggravated assault on Emma. Then, finding that the underwater hazard creation represented a separate, uniquely egregious, and calculated course of criminal conduct warranting distinct punishment, he imposed a significant consecutive sentence specifically for those environmental and public endangerment crimes. The combined sentences ensured Beverly Carmichael, stripped of her community's standing and freedom, would spend well over a decade, likely closer to 15 years, behind bars. Civil lawsuits inevitably followed the criminal conviction, resulting in court orders forcing the forfeiture and liquidation of virtually all her significant assets, including her house on the lake, to cover the substantial costs associated with the professional lake cleanup and environmental remediation efforts, and to provide substantial damages awarded to the Carter family to cover Emma's past and future medical expenses, intensive ongoing therapeutic needs, and compensation for the profound emotional trauma inflicted upon the child and her parents. In the aftermath of the trial and sentencing, the Whispering Pines Lake community embarked on a difficult, often painful period of introspection, reckoning, healing, and systemic change. The traumatized and newly humbled HOA board, facing intense ongoing scrutiny from residents and regulators, implemented stringent new safety protocols and inspection schedules for all common areas, particularly the lakefront. They launched mandatory educational initiatives and workshops for residents and all board members focused on neurodiversity awareness, disability sensitivity training, conflict resolution, and fostering genuine community inclusion. A palpable, though gradual, shift occurred within the neighborhood's social fabric, fostering a stronger, more vigilant, and more compassionate sense of shared responsibility for community well-being and mutual safety. Emma Carter, surrounded by the unwavering, patient, fierce love and support of her parents, and aided by intensive, specialized trauma-focused therapy, slowly, painstakingly began her long journey towards healing. The fear of the pier, the specific spot where she went over, lingered for months, manifesting as intense anxiety. Sudden loud noises, unexpected splashes, even the sight of the lake on cloudy days, could trigger debilitating panic attacks. Nightmares plagued her sleep frequently, often involving dark water and falling. Sarah, too, battled her own demons, recurring intrusive flashbacks of the shove, the splash, the agonizing seconds before Ben arrived, waves of consuming anger alternating with profound guilt and helplessness. She channeled these turbulent feelings into fierce, protective advocacy for Emma and other children with disabilities. Ben found his professional rescue instincts bleeding into his personal life, becoming hypervigilant, constantly scanning for threats, struggling to reconcile the commander who acted decisively with the father who felt powerless in that initial moment of horror. Emma's expressive stimmying, initially suppressed almost entirely out of a newfound, deep-seated fear of drawing negative attention or provoking anger, gradually began to return. It started tentatively, small hand movements mostly confined to the safety of her own home, then slowly, encouraged by her therapists and parents, became more confident as she gradually relearned to trust her body's signals and, cautiously, her environment again. This progress was bolstered by a community now actively, if imperfectly, working towards understanding and acceptance. Her joyful flapping near the water's edge, the very behavior that had once been a target for hostility and violence, was now, when it occasionally surfaced during moments of genuine excitement, met with quiet acceptance, sometimes even understanding smiles from neighbors who had learned, the hard way, about the beauty and vulnerability inherent in difference. Ben and Sarah Carter, thrust unwillingly into a public role by their private trauma, became dedicated, eloquent advocates. They shared their family's difficult story at community events, school board meetings, and disability awareness conferences, tirelessly promoting acceptance, challenging prejudice wherever they encountered it, and emphasizing the critical importance of recognizing, protecting, and cherishing vulnerable individuals within every community. The ugly, dangerous secrets hidden for months beneath the placid, glittering surface of Whispering Pines Lake, both the treacherous physical debris maliciously placed there and the insidious, festering prejudice it represented, had been painfully, publicly exposed, dredged up, and ultimately removed. Left behind was a community profoundly wounded, forever changed by the trauma, but ultimately determined to heal, to learn, and to build something stronger, safer, and genuinely more compassionate on the painful foundations of a near tragedy. Emma, playing one sunny afternoon months later near the now-repaired pier, felt a surge of happiness watching a dragonfly hover. Her hands fluttered briefly, freely, by her sides. A neighbor walking past simply smiled.